Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob with Jeff here tonight, and we're going to be talking about the Seahawks, all the big topics to get into. But before we get into anything, Jeff, I just have to play this. There we go. If that's not worth a super chat, I don't know what is. So get them sent in if you are with us here today. There's an awful lot to talk about with the Seahawks, Jeff, and I do want to get onto it. But a few days on from the Super Bowl, what's your sort of main takeaway from the Super Bowl? Either from a Seahawks perspective, a Niners perspective, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm still riding high from that exact moment. I had mentally prepared myself that for the whole week that the Niners were going to win. I was going to have to figure out how to cope with this, and I was so mad they blew that. Like Green Bay blew that game against them, and Detroit let them back in. It was just kind of funny to see the game they actually should have won. The Green Bay game they actually should have lost. Not the game they should have won, but kind of came back to bite them. But a couple of things. I think the Kyle Shanahan thing is very real of him in the fourth quarters. I know some people are making it out that he got Mahomes and all this stuff. They held him to 19 points in regulation. I don't think he got Mahomes. They should have won that game. And then to take the ball to start overtime, and there was just so many times where he didn't run the ball. I thought he stiffened up again. And he did go for it in fourth down, so you got to give him credit for that. That could have won them the game, but they went for it. I think it was a 4th and 4. But that's a game they should have won. And their defense hasn't looked great in the playoffs. And from the Seahawks standpoint, you see how far they are and how good you have to be in a couple areas. The quarterback position is obviously a big conversation. You see how hard it is to beat Patrick Mahomes and how he looks like Michael Jordan, from one of these greatest athletes of all time. And defensively, in line of scrimmage, you see exactly what we're talking about. The two most impactful players in the game, and I know everyone's going to talk about Mahomes, but it was Chris Jones, who really won the Super Bowl. If you saw how wide open Brandon Ayuk was, and then Nick Bosa was fantastic, and so was Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead. So Seattle has some good players, but we've talked about this for so long, shifting money from safety to the line of scrimmage, and you just see these guys take over games, and I see it in the playoffs every year, these game wreckers. Seattle has good players. They don't have that still. And Mike McDonald's defense is a little different. They had an elite defense without one of those guys. So Seattle has to get better at the line of scrimmage, and that game to me was more evidence of that.
How do you think we find a game wrecker then, Jeff? And I've been looking at the draft, and I do think there's maybe one player in round one that could potentially fit the bill with that. And even then, it's a huge question mark. It's Chop Robinson. I think that he has got this. For anybody who's not watched him, his his get off is unbelievable. And his ability to bend and get around the edge has to be seen to be believed. He's got good size. He's about 255 pounds. He is going to test brilliantly at the combine. And, they have just appointed a British defensive coordinator who has worked with Micah Parsons. And you always want to be wary of making comparisons to somebody as generational as Micah Parsons. But he has some of the traits that Parsons has got. And you kind of think, could he potentially be that guy? But Jeff, nearly every year there's somebody like this who you go, well, he's an amazing athlete, or he could end up being this kind of guy, and it never quite happens. I mean, there are players who, like the other Josh Allen, for example, I think had 19 sacks this season or something. That's an amazing production, but I don't think anybody would consider him to be necessarily a game-wrecking edge rusher. He's just a very good edge rusher. So actually finding that dominant player, and I suspect if Baltimore and Mike McDonald's defense it succeeded without a game wrecker, but I suspect if they actually had a Chris Jones, they probably would have been in the Super Bowl instead of the Chiefs.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're hoping with Seattle. I think they're as hard to find as the elite quarterbacks, and that's why there was so much talk about Will Anderson last year and all the people who fell for Jalen Carter, which they're starting a lot of cracks are starting to show on that front. But yeah, Rob, but I think you from Seattle's standpoint, you have to hope that Mike McDonald can really unlock some of these guys. Because what he did with Clowney and Van Noy, who were essentially street free agents who are nearing the end of their careers, and turn them into a dominant pass rushing group. I think you're hoping that Seattle can get a little more out of a Boye Mafe or a Nwosu, but I don't think you look at those guys and they're not top of the line players. They're good players. I don't think anyone sees them as great players. So you either got to keep taking shots in the draft and hope, because like Max Crosby was a 4th round pick, Chris Jones 2nd round pick. Now Bosa goes the first, basically top 3. Myles Garrett top 3, doing 1st overall. And like I don't know if that's a Chop Robinson. I don't know if that's a Jared Verse. I don't know where that is, but oh man, the more I keep looking into this first round of the draft and what Seattle's going to do, I'm struggling because they don't. You're not going to get a guy in free agency. And Derek Hall, I imagine you're hoping you can get something out of next year with this new coaching staff. But I don't think he projects at that level by any means. I think he's more of a rotational guy. They were hoping to get Will Anderson, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year, and they ultimately would have if Houston didn't make that trade back up. So that would have been nice to have if you had Will Anderson, Nwosu, and Boye Mafe. But yeah, I think you got to either keep taking shots, and they don't have a 2nd round pick this year, which still hurts so bad. So in the meantime, you got to hope Mike McDonald can really elevate these guys like they did in Baltimore. Maybe you take a look at Clowney, maybe you don't, but there's no sure answer to that, and that's where Seattle's kind of in a tough spot. Their whole roster sort of sums up that problem. They're good, but they're not great.
A few people in the chat are saying more about Byron Murphy from Texas. Listen, I watched every Texas game because, well, Quinn Ewers more than anything. And Murphy's very, very athletic and will be one of the stars of the combine without a shadow of a doubt. But his play is so streaky. I mean, I never watched him and felt I'm watching a game wrecker here. He's undersized. He's pretty maxed out at his size. He's not somebody who you feel can get bigger. I'm not sure about his arm length. We'll see how that is at the combine. So I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot of players like him over the years, these very athletic defensive tackles, and everybody's kind of hoping they're going to be the next Geno Atkins, and never quite comes off. So we'll see. Having watched Texas, I kind of have a suspicion about Murphy and Tavondre Sweat on both instances. The two players who really just sort of elevated in their final years, and I kind of want to know why. Why were they not really on anybody's radar until this year? But I don't see a game wrecker. I see a good player, not necessarily a game wrecker. I mean, I think they're going to trade down, Jeff. I mean, we're going to get onto. We'll probably come back to this topic down the line. But I will ask you about this. I think Schneider's going to go back to what maybe were some of the things that frustrated a lot of people about John Schneider in previous years. I do think free agency is going to be different. I think there's now probably is going to be we're going to take a step back and let it come to us approach to everything. I think there's going to be trading down to acquire more stock. I do not think John Schneider wants to pick at 16 and then wait 60 picks to pick again, unless there is somebody at 16 that just blows his socks off. Like I saw Field Yates' mock draft, and he had like Brock Bowers last into 16. Like if that happens, you probably just have to take him because he's like George Kittle. So, he's like a faster George Kittle. So like you need to have that if he's going to last that. But if that doesn't happen, then you probably, I think they almost certainly are going to move down into the 20s, maybe even drop down twice, fill out their board, and that's how they're going to start to build this thing and be patient in free agency. But do you get that sense, or do you think differently? Because I guess the quarterback situation can change it. If they just think the guy is there, they'd be quite foolish to not take him at 16. But is the guy going to be there in John's eyes at 16? I'm not convinced on that.
I've been playing a lot with these mock draft simulators, and obviously the rankings. Like PFF says, playing. We did a show last night just doing PFF mock drafts, and the rankings are very wonky. I think you, especially Rob, would find some of their current ratings. Like Cooper DeJean is going in like 6th overall on their Sims, but it's just I think he was like 28th, and so it's. But the thing that hole in the draft, I just can't get to almost any scenario unless they see Jared Verse as like a top 10 player where you don't move back, because every time there's going to be a run on quarterbacks in this draft, and there's going to be some guys like everyone thinks JJ McCarthy is going to go in the top 12. and I don't think he should be. I'm very much aligned with your evaluation of him, but there's a run in the draft of 11, 12, 13. It is Minnesota, Denver, the Raiders. All three of them have no starting quarterback on their roster. Well, Russell's technically on their roster, but all three of them are going to be likely looking at new quarterbacks, assuming if Minnesota doesn't re-sign Cousins. One of those teams, potentially two, might draft like the Knicks, Penix, that second tier of quarterbacks, which is going to push a bunch of people down. And every time I kind of go through these scenarios, I'm on the board at 16, and there's 4 to 7 players I'd be very happy to take. And there's no reason, unless they evaluate one of these guys as a sure thing quarterback or someone faults them that they just have graded in the top 5, that they can leave that hole in their drafts that they created with that Leonard Williams trade, which was stupid. And I think you'd be very comfortable moving down. You got to try to get that second rounder back. You got to somehow. They have a lot of holes on this team, as much as they have talent. And the thing with the Seahawks is there's 2 different skills. There's accumulating talent and there's building a team. I think the Seahawks have done a really good job accumulating talent. But in terms of team building, there's holes. They're weak on the offensive line. Their defensive line right now without Leonard Williams is not good. There's not a lot of Draymond Jones at max has 1 year left. They might walk away from him now. I think they're absolutely going to walk away from him next year unless he has like a crazy breakout season. Linebacker, they have no linebacker signed. I'm guessing they signed one, probably Jordan Brooks, but I don't know. I don't know if they signed Patrick Queen. I don't think it's a great idea to invest the money there. Either way, they're going to need to draft a young guy. Devin Bush, Wagner, I don't think they'll be back. They need to get better at those key spots. And in McDonald's defense, linebacker is an important guy. Junior Colson is a guy who's going to go in the second round, and I think McDonald's going to know really, really well. So I think they're going to have to move down unless something's truly unexpected, like the Earl Thomas falling to them happens. But I think the way this draft sets up with that very clear hole, if you can get a 2 back, then you have your 2 3s, I think that's going to look a lot better. But this is such an interesting draft for Seattle because the way they design their coaching staff. They're going to have information on these players that really not a lot of teams are going to have. Obviously, the Chargers will, but Byron Murphy, for example, who did Washington play in the semifinal? Texas. Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, they're going to know Murphy, everything about him. They studied that guy for weeks. There was a month gap between that game. So Michael Penix, they're going to have the best information of anyone in the league on him. So they're going to really have different evaluations than other teams. But I think the more I just keep trying to put this puzzle together, if you just pick at 16, unless you're planning to move up and into the second round, you're just left with a giant hole. And I know you and Jim Nagy have talked about this, just going through these simulators. By the time you get to round 4, like, it's bad.
It really is. And by the way, if anybody wants to have I know you mentioned the PFF one, Jeff. The new one that I've started using is the Sports Skeeter mock draft.
I haven't seen that.
The rankings are a little bit better. I mean, there's still some crazy stuff that happens in there. Like some of the guys who are available like round 4, but this is the way with all of them. But it's aesthetically pleasing. I think it's a good looking mock draft simulator, and it does some good things. And there's always a trade offer at 16. So if you want to play around with stuff like that, it's quite fun. I'm already quite addicted to it. On McCarthy, I have never watched him, Jeff, and thought I want this guy in Seattle.
No.
And yet I understand. I think today is the first day it's dawned on me why I think he's going to go higher than I have like a round 3 on him. But Lance Zierlein started talking about a statistic. I think it was something to do with, I'm going to get it up here. It was something to do with completion percentage on scrambles. And I had a look at it, and he listed sort of Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and McCarthy. And unbelievably, McCarthy's completion percentage on scrambles is 71.4%. So that's really good. The rest, Caleb Williams is 42%. Drake May, 37%. Daniels, who's the big scrambling Lamar Jackson type, 46.7%. Bo Nix, 59%. Penix, 23%. And JJ McCarthy's 71.4%. So I'm looking at that thinking, I never noticed that. Like I was not, and then I actually went back and watched 2 games very quickly. And I was like, oh yeah, like he does actually scramble around and get the ball out. And I was thinking, that's not really anything that until I've seen that, I picked up. So I was kind of digging a little bit because I spoke to, I'm very fortunate to speak to a couple of people, only a couple, who are in the league, and I think they are legit. And I spoke to someone a few weeks ago, and I said, "What do you look for? What should you be looking for at quarterbacks?" And he says, "Do you know what? I only watch third downs. When I'm watching a quarterback, I just watch every third down throw they've ever thrown in their college career. And after I've watched them, I decide whether I want to watch anymore." And I thought, I probably wouldn't do that, but okay, that's what. But it's an interesting way of going about it. When the money downs, I want to see what this person can do. So I was kind of fishing with Lance and saying, "Hey, do you have any data on third downs?" And he was like, "Oh, I wish it was public." And I was like, "Okay, he's not going to give it us." But then this random guy who was like a Vikings fan said, "Oh, I've got the data," and he sent me. I don't know if he charted this himself, because if he has, fair play. His name's Nicholas Miller, and it was every throw that the same quarterbacks had done on 3rd and 7 or longer. And I was looking at that, and I was JJ McCarthy, his completion percentage on 3rd and 7 it's 73%. Only Bo Nix was higher. And Bo Nix has a lot of those short dump-offs and stuff like that. But on those 3rd and long situations, Jeff, his passer rating was 149. And again, only Bo Nix was anywhere close to that. And Jaden Daniels was 3rd. And when I was looking at that and I was looking at the scramble, I was thinking, it might be hard to buy into JJ McCarthy watching him on tape. But if you're statistically or analytically based as a GM, or if you have analytics people within your building, and you're saying, "Give me the data, what do I need to be looking at?" Those are the kind of things that might make you go, "Well, actually, I can work on his arm strength when it comes to needing to scramble away from pressure and completion or converting a 3rd and long. This guy's doing it better than anybody else." So that's why I think he's going to end up going to somewhere like Denver or something like that. And that Sean Payton or someone's going to go, "Yeah, I'll have that." But the good news with that, Jeff, is I think that will push somebody down to Seattle. And then the other thing is, I still don't think the Seahawks would take him, Jeff, even if Mike McDonald's banging the tail for him, because I do think John and Ryan Grubb want someone who can challenge opponents vertically, and that's not JJ McCarthy, is it?
It's going to be so fascinating. I wish I can get a look in that building, because you're going to have Ryan Grubb on one side, who we think of a lot of Penix, but like McCarthy and his offense at Washington, it's just an odd fit. And then you're going to have Jay Harbaugh, who's been around. He's coached several different positions. No one's going to know McCarthy other than Jim Harbaugh, better than Jay Harbaugh. He's worked as running backs coach. He's been around this guy for years. And McDonald, who grew up through the Michigan Harbaugh system. And then you're going to have Grubb and Scott Huff. And so you're going to have really differing information than whatever Schneider is coming at it. So those pre-draft meetings on quarterbacks are going to be really interesting. I think he's going to go before Seattle picks. And I think Seattle's going to, if they want him that bad, they're going to have to trade up, which would destroy a lot of people in Seahawks land. You mentioned analytics. No one is more analytically driven in the front office than the Vikings. Their GM came up from an analytics role. They need a quarterback. I know their fans are studying him very closely. Even if they sign Kirk Cousins, he's 36 years old, coming off an Achilles injury. So I think that's a hard guy. I think him or Sean Payton, I think one of those guys. But, man, Seattle's going to have a ton of info through Harbaugh and through McDonald. I think Harbaugh is going to be a huge resource on that front.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the guy who sent me those third downs is a Vikings fan, I think. And someone said to him, "What, talk me off the ledge. I think the Seahawks are going to draft him now." And he went, "Oh, no, they won't, because you'll have to trade up for him." And he thought that, and now I think he must be thinking then, he's obviously put a lot of work into this. He thinks the Vikings might go that way, whether they re-sign Kirk Cousins or not.
Yeah, and I think there's that three in a row: Vikings, Broncos, Raiders. All of them have no answers at the quarterback position right now. Russell Wilson's not expected to be back. The Raiders have Aiden O'Connell and Jimmy Garoppolo, who probably won't be back. I think one of those teams are going to fall in love with him. I think the stats are there, and it's just the imagination's there because while he's never been asked to do a lot of these things, someone's going to convince themselves if we let him play like this, maybe he'll be a different quarterback. And the third downs, someone like Sean Payton, I can see falling for that guy completely. So I don't think he's going to make it to 16, which is some people think is insane. But the more this keeps happening, I think he's going to build up.
I completely agree. I'm fascinated by the quarterback class this year. Now, I want to talk about Seattle's quarterbacks in a second. That is sort of the big topic this week. But it intrigues me a lot, Jeff, because I think you have a group of quarterbacks who it's very hard to place. I think a couple of years ago, it was very easy just to say, I'm not having Malik Willis and Matt Corral and Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder. Last year, it was very easy to look at Anthony Richardson, the Greek god that he is, and think, well, someone's going to take him early. And I thought the same about Will Levis. Obviously, that didn't happen. But CJ Stroud and Bryce Young were always going to go early. And then this year, you have players who obviously will go early. But then you have, if Bo Nix was available in the 60s, I wouldn't be surprised. But if Bo Nix went like in the top 20, I don't think I'd be surprised. I mean, he threw a flea flicker at the Senior Bowl, 60 yards, like it was like one of us throwing it 5 yards. It was so easy for him. And then you've got Michael Penix, who, maybe his short and intermediate throws are not great, but the downfield throws, Jeff, and the layered passes to the sideline, there just aren't people like even Mahomes can't throw some of these passes that Michael Penix complete at Washington. It's unbelievable. But where does he go? Because like you have to balance out, yeah, great. You have Penix and he might be a 50% thrower every week, which is not what you want. But the 50% that you get might involve like 3 40, 50-yard plays that win you the game. So, and then the other thing, Jeff, is like everybody's going to be looking at the Seahawks for exactly what you say. Jay Harbaugh's there. McDonald's there. They're going to know J.J. McCarthy. You've then got Ryan Grubb, who knows Penix. Like anybody who is interested in Penix in any way, shape, or form is going to be so fascinated to see what the Seahawks think about Michael Penix. And every time the Seahawks don't take Michael Penix, they're going to have to second guess themselves a little bit. Like, why don't they want him? Or if they think the Seahawks are going to take him very early, Jeff, we need to probably think about, well, they've got all the information and they're going to take him really early and we don't want to not whiff here. So this is really interesting to me. I mean, if they passed on Penix, let's say they got into round 2, they got back into the second round and then they passed on Penix there, that'd be quite damning for Michael Penix because of the coaches they've appointed now. I just find the whole thing really interesting. And like mentally, I'm preparing myself for Seattle at some point to draft a quarterback because I think John Schneider's ready to do that. And I do think they need to start taking some shots. I think the Geno Smith topic we're going to come on to is very important. But I do find it fascinating, Jeff. There's a lot of players I like in this draft, but I'm not against taking a chance on one of these quarterbacks either. I don't think there's necessarily a Mahomes going to be there for Seattle because I think the only guy who's going to be that is the first overall pick. But, how long do you wait for somebody like that to appear? You could wait 10 years and there's not another Mahomes or Josh Allen, couldn't you?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really tricky. We've heard already usually you always hear next year's quarterback class is even better than this year. I think every draft I've ever followed, someone's always talking about next year's quarterback class. This is the first one I can remember where everyone's saying, no, next year's quarterback class is terrible. So this is not, I haven't heard that in years. So maybe the year where the Seahawks actually got those picks and it was Pickett and Ridder, like that was the first time where you heard like, okay, this year's quarterback class actually is bad. I haven't dug into next year yet, but so if they don't take one now, where you're assuming Mike Macdonald's going to elevate this team, they were a 9-win team, as messed up as they were last year. I don't see them getting much worse than that. So you're not going to be in like a position to draft a quarterback, assuming moving forward. So I don't know how you can go into this draft and not want to be drafting a quarterback. There's a large number of them. They're very different. And it's going to get harder every year if they get better coaching. And one of the reasons they weren't better this year is because Pete Carroll and his staff did not elevate their players. And they could have easily been as shitty as they were, an 11-win team last year, picking 23. And then they'd be even more screwed. So I don't – if Mike McDonald kind of fixes up the defense and Ryan Grubb elevates the offense, they're not going to be near the top 10. So I think that if you're not taking – and the whole Schneider thing, like, I think he's been wanting to take quarterback for a while. The draft hasn't quite lined up. I remember last year he was pretty upset. One of them didn't fall to him. And we'll always would have wondered what would have happened if Anthony Richardson fell to pick 5. I wonder if they have any regrets about Will Levis. Maybe they could have taken him with a 20th pick. But I don't know if that's the Mike McDonald, Schneider kind of guy. But you'd rather have him than the guys they have in the building right now. But I think if they had hired Dan Quinn and you had like that Cliff Kingsbury, Brian Johnson, Anthony Lynn coaching staff that they put together there, I don't know. But the way they put together their staff, and it's so interesting, shaped around college football and so shaped around those two quarterbacks, McCarthy and Penix, it's just hard not to think about those two guys. And then there's Spencer Rattler, who you've been kind of ahead of the curve on. He's kind of that next tier of guys, because when you get that much lower than that, there's not much there. So it's just going to be really interesting because our staff is going to be so college football driven rather than, say, Washington, who has such an NFL heavy staff with Brian Johnson and Anthony Lynn, who have been in the NFL for quite some time. I think Seattle's going to be looking at quarterback very strong this year. I'd be pretty shocked if they don't draft one.
I wonder if I wrote this after the Super Bowl. My opinion changes nearly every other day on this, but I do wonder if they might just not necessarily attack the position. I don't think they're going to take at the minute. I don't think they're going to take a quarterback at 16. But if you trade down and you accumulate some stock in day 2, and if you end up, if they end up with the second round pick, or if they just end up with another third round pick, if there's a quarterback in round 3 or round 2 that they believe in, they might take a chance on them there, and they might start taking a few shots. I don't think it's going to be all out aggressive, take one in round 1, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I do want to talk about some other sort of, offensive line sort of things around the draft, Jeff, because I think it's absolutely vital. I think the quarterback situation is like 1A on main topics. I think trenches is 1B. Like working out the future at both positions is the crucial for the Seahawks. Geno Smith on Friday is the deadline for a section of his contract becoming guaranteed. So it kind of sets a deadline for any restructuring or reworking of the deal. I think a lot of people are mistakenly, if he is not cut before Friday, going to say, well, that's it. He's staying. I mean, I've even seen Joel Corey, who's very, very clued in on the cap situation, saying, well, if he's here by Friday, he's not going anywhere. But he perhaps isn't aware of the stuff that Brady Henderson's been reporting, and Curtis has been doing a good job on our blog doing this as well, that there's a date in March, I think it's 18th of March or something like that, whereby they could still trade him. And when you see there are teams like the Steelers saying, well, we would be open-minded about having a veteran quarterback and trading for that person, but it will not be a big splash. It will not be Justin Fields. You're thinking, well, who could it possibly be? There's not that many veteran quarterbacks. They're not going to go Jimmy Garoppolo. And you kind of get the feeling that Geno will be a good fit for them because their defense is so good. They run the ball quite well. Like Geno could be a perfect complementary player for them. And that, they might be able to get him and feel very good about that. But I suppose on the other hand, Jeff, I don't think Geno Smith's going to be here on 31.2 million cap hit. I just don't. I know a lot of people say it's fair and his salary is okay and all of that, comparatively speaking. I don't think we should look at it comparing it to peers. I think we need to think about the situation the 2024 Seahawks are in, which is they don't have a lot of cap space. They need to save some money. They need to work things around. And for that reason, I think he's either going to go because John Schneider was not a Geno guy, maybe, and Pete Carroll was, and John just wants to go in a different direction and reset things under a new era, or they will restructure it and they will stick with Geno and go, okay, he's our bridge. We'll bring back Drew Lock. We've got 2 guys. If the draft comes to us, great. If not, we've got these 2 guys again, and we'll see where we are in 12 months. I think that's a surefire way to keep yourself I think you almost have to take a bit of a risk eventually at quarterback, either by trying a rookie or trying somebody else. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck in the middle ground forever and you're never going to be either high enough to draft somebody, or you're never going to, like, we're always going to be sort of saying Geno's just good enough to avoid a difficult conversation. Like, there has to be something eventually, but maybe they rework his deal before Friday, Jeff. I've sort of wondered, is the lukewarm, because they've been so lukewarm talking about Geno. Like when Mike McDonald was like, what do you think of Geno? Well, Drew and Geno. And it's like, it does it all the time. Like, like maybe I'm reading too much into it, Jeff, but even when Brock and Salt asked Mike McDonald, who have you spoken to? Drew and Geno. It's like, you named Drew first. Like, you put Drew's name. He's not even under contract for next year. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but John, at no point, Jeff, it would have been so easy for one of them just to go, next year, we're looking forward to Geno doing this, or Geno's our guy, or we're looking for a bit more consistency from Geno, or we're excited to see what Geno can do in this offense. They've never referenced next season with Geno. They've just kept their options open. Now, they might be doing that because they're negotiating hard with his agent to drive his cap hit down before Friday. Or it might just be, Jeff, that they just want to move on. And I think anything's on the table. What do you think about this situation?
It's hard not to hear both the way Mike McDonald and John Schneider have described him and come to the same conclusion you have. It's very hard. I'm watching this date on Friday very closely because, you've wrote this several times, but they could have, on multiple occasions, came out. I even just said, this is our quarterback. We look forward to building a better team around him and anything like that. And the way they said, we have some big decisions coming up this week. That was not a great answer if you're hoping Geno's the guy. And they were very lukewarm in the opening press conference. We know that this was Pete Carroll's guy. When Pete was asked to describe the strengths of this team, other than his weird special teams answer, his first thing was the experience of Geno Smith. I don't think John views it like that. I had heard that John was upset that Geno was initially named the starter without consulting with him. I think John's got a blind spot for Drew Lock, and I'm a little worried about that he might go into this year just thinking they can get by with Drew Lock. I'm hoping Mike McDonald and Grubb see it a little differently. I don't get the sense that John is the big Geno guy. I think they like him. I think they would probably see him as a Matt Flynn. But a Matt Flynn making $31 million, I think Matt Flynn that year made like $8 million. It's a big issue. And so I would keep Geno for a year and probably try to draft someone, probably lower his cap hit because Geno is an asset. I don't want to give away him for free. I don't know if there's going to be a trade market for him. It's just a weird quarterback market right now where there's Fields, there's Russell, and then there's a whole class of young guys, and then Kirk Cousins is going to be around. I don't know if there's an answer for Geno. And if no one's willing to trade for him, that pretty much says how he's viewed in the league. So I think Baker's going to be going back there, but it's tricky. I wouldn't be surprised if they walk away from him. I don't think that's the smartest way to do it, but I think John probably looks at it and sees that they can get similar production out of another quarterback. I think Geno's is a top 15 quarterback, but I think John talks about wanting a championship caliber roster all the time. I think with Geno, you're always sort of going to be limited the same way the Titans were with Ryan Tannehill. And Vikings have been with Kirk Cousins, who was probably similar to Geno, and the Niners kind of were with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think Geno's a little better than some of those guys, but I don't think he fits the John Schneider mold. And I'd love to know what Mike McDonald thinks of him because that game where they played Seattle that ultimately might have drove him to hire him. That was Geno's. A lot of it will have to do with offensive line, which we'll talk about later. But they embarrassed Geno. He did not know what he was doing in the offensive line. Another thing, that's where I'd be so fascinated to know McDonald's view of the offensive line, which they absolutely embarrassed. But I would not be surprised, and I think this would be a mistake if John says, okay, we can go through Lock for a year and see what happens. I just don't want to see Drew Lock. I'd rather see Tyler Huntley for a year. But if it's someone other than Drew Lock, I would understand it. But I know there are a lot of Seahawks fans very worried about this Friday. Based on the comments they've made, based on Mike McDonald's comments on the radio, we have some big decisions to make. That might be Draymond Jones too. But I think everything's on the table. I don't think they're going to view Geno as a long-term starter here. So I think they're going to be I think everything's on the table. And Brady did a really good job in that article today talking about basically he dove into his contract, and I know that pretty deeply. So if you want to learn about that, give that a read. It's really good stuff.
He's very connected as well. So if he was saying Geno Smith's not going to go anywhere, then I would listen to that. And instead, he's talking about all the possibilities. So I'm listening to that. What I don't get, Jeff, is it seems to me every time you have a conversation about Geno Smith like this. I mean, I'm seeing it in the comment section now. It's almost like when the bat signal goes off in Batman. Like there's a light goes off somewhere and points towards a section of the fan base. And they all have to sort of congregate and shout at the moon about the fact that you're having a conversation that Geno Smith might not be part of the team next year. Listen, I completely agree with you. I think it's pretty obvious that Geno Smith is a superior player to Drew Lock. I completely agree with you, Jeff, that I think there's a chance that John Schneider has a bit of a blind spot for Drew Lock and may go with him instead, or might think that is a cheaper, more viable option to move forward. Because look, people are assuming that even Brady said this, that Drew Lock might want a pay increase for next season. But what if he isn't? Like then you're looking at a $4 million cap hit versus a $31.2 million cap hit. That's a $27 million difference. And John Schneider might just think, the other thing that people don't really consider, Jeff, is that if the Seahawks have identified one or more quarterbacks in this draft that they are sort of inclined to just roll with and try and get the most out of the rookie contract and go with that as a starter in year one, it's a lot harder to bench Geno Smith on $31.2 million and have him riding the bench, taking up a huge chunk of cap space like that, than it is to have Drew Lock riding the bench on $4, $5, $6 million, which is a viable salary for a backup quarterback. So these are the different things that we have to consider. I am not against Geno Smith. I'm a bit bored of being accused of hating Geno Smith or seeing, it made out that there's a load of haters or anti-Geno Smith. It's nothing to do with that. I think it's about the long-term vision of this team. And I tell you what I would like to see, Jeff, more than anything, is a really aggressive approach to reshaping this roster. And that includes Geno Smith, but it includes Draymond Jones. It includes Jamal Adams, Will Disley, Quandre Diggs, Tyler Lockett. I think I want them to be honest. It feels to me like the Seahawks have been pretending for years that they're better than they are, that they're closer than they are. I want to see a realization that they're not as close as they've been sort of implying that they are for a while, that major surgeries, they need to get the cap situation right. It can't go every single year being $9.5 million over effective cap space. If you just sort of tweak things a little bit with this player and that player, next year you'll be in the same position. What you really want to be is like next year in a position where you've got like 30, 40 million to spend, and you can go and attack free agency maybe to go and take a big step forward, or you can, start to sort of re-sign the right players. For too long, they've been re-signing the wrong players, giving huge salaries to Quandre Diggs. That's nonsense. Don't do that kind of thing. Focus your money on proper players. Like you look at the Niners, where are they spending most of their money? It's on people like Trent Williams and George Kittle and Fred Warner and Javon Hargrave and Nick Bosa and people like that. And we're spending our money on Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. You've got to sort of reshape the whole structure of your cap, your roster, get your priorities right, put it in the trenches rather than positions like safety. And that's going to take a really aggressive approach, Jeff. And if that means that the Seahawks have to just take a little step back this year to reset things, I'm cool with that, because Ryan Grubb's on a learning curve. Mike McDonald's on a learning curve. Aiden Durday's on a learning curve. Even to some extent, John Schneider's on a learning curve because he's like the main man now. I'm kind of thinking maybe we just have to embrace that this is going to take a bit of time and like be aggressive like you were in 2010, 2011 to reshape this thing. And if that means, okay, you've got a weaker quarterback situation for a year, but we might learn a bit more about everything and it might help us in the long run. I think everything should be on the table. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I don't think it means you hate anybody. It's just like, what's the best thing for the Seahawks to potentially win a Super Bowl, Jeff, in the next 5 years? Not what is the best thing to win as many games as possible in 2024. That's the mentality that I want.
It's almost like you're reading my mind. It's kind of scary. a lot of people were talking last week of like what the expectations, how many wins should Seattle have next year with this coaching staff. I think that's looking at the whole situation completely wrong. I don't care how many games they win next year unless it's like 1 or 2. I want to see they're setting the table up for building for something in 2025. To me, next year is the adjustment of the coaching staff. Absolutely, they have one of the lowest NFL experience on the coaching staff I can ever remember. I don't think that's a big deal. I think that's the kind of thing I think that's smart. And it took Baltimore 2 years to build that defense under McDonald with all those guys until really they got Roquan Smith. That sort of unlocked everything. And really the first year was a big adjustment year. And Seattle does not have some of the kind of guys that they've had. They don't have a Kyle Hamilton. They don't have some of the players. They have Roquan Smith. So I think offensively, they got to get the line of scrimmage right. And it's going to be so fascinating where the Seahawks have been very much like Ted Thompson, Green Bay, and that's where Schneider came from, where you take tackles early, but you find guards anywhere. Now you got an offensive line guy as your offensive coordinator with his offensive and a team that Baltimore who just exposed their offensive line. There's going to be definitely pushback on interior O-line. So to me, I want to see them kind of take a year back. And what's so fascinating about the Seahawks now is we're really going to see how much was Pete Carroll and how much was John Schneider. I think that's going to be so fascinating because from the coaching staff building, they've looked more coherent and more thorough and more logical than really anything the Seahawks have done in a while. We've seen some good moves. We've seen some good drafts here and there. We've seen some good trades. But they've always kind of felt like a 70-year-old man was running their team. And Pete was great at what he was great at, but I think giving all that money to safeties, I think bring back Bobby Wagner last year, I think signing Draymond Jones, some of the coaching appointments they made, which would not have been made by any other team, that felt like Pete Carroll. And the Jamal Adams trade itself, I don't think that's something John Schneider would have done. I really don't. Some of the money they've spent, I know people have been arguing, Mike Salt's been arguing to trade DK Metcalf. I don't think that's a great idea either, but I think they missed the boat on that. I think they would have had to do that before the Russell trade when he was on a rookie contract. But I'm with you. Like, I don't care if they win 10 or 9 games next year. I want to see that they're progressing into something in 2025 that can be legitimate. So if they need to take a year, if they have to put Tyler Huntley at quarterback next year, who McDonald knows, and they can run an offense and draft a guy, this is the thing to me. Geno Smith right now is better than any quarterback they will have if you're purely looking at 2024. But in 2025, what would you rather have and beyond? Would you rather have a Geno Smith that's kind of declining, that's getting a little, or would you rather take a step back this year and kind of take your lumps, and by 2025, you're ascending rather than being the best for 2024? That's a short-term window. I'd rather take my lumps in 2024 and be set up to ascend moving forward. So that's how I look at this year. I think you got to rebuild the line of scrimmage. I think they have the coaching staff that's going to want that. I don't know what John Schneider wants, but the coaching staff and their backgrounds, they're going to value trench play. So if you need to take a step back to set up the next couple of years, I'm like, look what the Niners have done. That's how they got Nick Bosa. And some of that was injury related. That's how they got some of the key guys on their team. And the Seahawks have always been huddling around the 8-9 win, which is why they've ended up with none of these game record blue chip players. So the 1 year Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt, the Niners come out with Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel, then they're a Super Bowl contender. They're in the Super Bowl the next year. So if they need to take a step back, I don't care. Unless they're a total Jim Mora and Nathaniel Hackett disaster, that's really what I want to see.
Yeah, I just want to see the team heading in the right direction. I want us to be sat here in a year's time and understand where the team's going. And I think part of the problem is that at the minute, people are viewing it purely through the lens of what is best for like now, as if they were going to try and win a game in week 1 in 2024. Geno Smith's going to be 34 this year. He'll be 35 next year. Like, is it best to, like, I've seen some people suggesting like they could re-sign him and then he could play until 40. I mean, look, the guy's he's the age that he is. Like, eventually you are going to have to draft somebody and move forward, and you are going to have to rebuild the team and restructure things. And I just think everything should be on the table. And thankfully, Jeff, I think it is. Like with you mentioning like Draymond Jones, I don't think it'd be very easy for the Seahawks to just go, well, let's give him another year. Let's just see how it goes. I think they're seriously thinking, does this guy fit? Is that money better spent somewhere else? Can we transfer that money? Even if we have to eat some dead money, can we put some of that into Leonard Williams or something? Or we can put that into a different player or an offensive lineman. I think everything's on the table. And I think it has to be. Like, I was running through PFF's free agency sort of top 100 today. And look, there's a bunch of guys who are not going to go anywhere. They're going to be franchised. Chris Jones's agent, by the way, will be on the phone to him today going, what are you doing, man? You're like telling everybody that you want to be back. We need to go in there and threaten that we're going to leave so we can get as much money as possible. But he won't be going anywhere. You can't imagine him playing somewhere else. And if he is, it'll be an insane salary that Seattle can't afford with their cap situation. But there are a bunch of guys that are interesting. And this is the thing, Jeff. I'd quite like to be able to go. The name that I'm going to write something about this down the line. I'm piecing through the article. Here's just a random name that caught my eye. It was like 54 in the rankings. It's Jonah Williams at Cincinnati. So this is a guy who was drafted 11th overall. It's never really worked out for him at tackle. He put in a trade request a year ago because they signed the guy from the Chiefs to play left tackle, whose name I've completely forgotten. And he ended up playing right tackle. Now, this was a guy that in the draft, I always thought he'd make a really good athletic guard. Probably not a great tackle. And he ended up playing right tackle last year. And I'm thinking, okay, go and get him. He hedges against Abraham Lucas not being healthy because he's played a whole bunch of right tackle. And if Lucas is fine, play him at guard. And then you've got that AFC North grizzled, athletic, well-sized interior offensive lineman who's 26 years old. He only turned 26 in November. That to me feels like the kind of signing that I could go, yeah, do you know what? That seems to make a lot of sense, and would be willing to sort of pay a bit more to sort of see if he could end up being a really cool offensive lineman for Seattle. I'd like to be able to sort of do things like that. And then there's a whole bunch of guys like, people are saying, oh, we can go and get Patrick Queen or people like that. And I'm thinking, well, do you know like Devin White was like 98th on their list? And they said like he could get a 1-year deal for $7 million. And I was thinking, I'd take a chance on him, former top 5 pick. And if it's not worked out for him in Tampa Bay, I'd take a chance on Mike McDonald doing to him what he did to Patrick Queen. And, if you, I'd draft the safety, but maybe go and take a chance on a Jeremy Chin for a couple of $1 million or something like that. His career seems to have completely collapsed. He was estimated to have a $2.5 million 1-year deal by PFF because he just seems to have fallen out of favor in Carolina. And you're thinking, there's loads of and John likes a reclamation project. There's a few of those guys out there, and then there are some good offensive linemen and some good defensive linemen. So go and get all that safety money and then go cheap there and young and fast and physical and, try and, if it's Jordan Brooks or White or whoever at linebacker, and try and drive them forward and work on them. But more than anything, just sort of try and get as much money into the lines so that when that draft starts, if you draft an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman, it's like an extra. It's not the shit, we need to go and draft a defensive lineman because we haven't done anything this offseason, or crap, we haven't improved our offensive line. We better go and do something here. It's like, hey, wouldn't it be great to finish off our line with Graham Barton from Duke? Do you see what I mean? Like, rather than feeling like you have to go and do that. And then you can start to build strengths. And that's, I think, how they're going to do this, Jeff. I don't think they're going to draft the way to an elite offensive line and an elite defensive line. I think there is going to have to be some veteran players in there, some proven quality. That's why I want to see Leonard Williams come back. But I do think they need to go and acquire some veteran offensive linemen too, Jeff. I don't think 5 young guys on rookie contracts are going to do it. They've got to get some grizzled, proven guys who've been there, have done that. And I think they will do that. I think that's inevitable. And it's reassuring because everything Mike McDonald's saying and John Schneider suggests that they're going to go in that direction. But I really hope they do it because I always think the big safety spend was a Pete thing. And now it's time to see. Ron Wolf was trenches, trenches, trenches. So let's see it. John, you keep saying he's your mentor. Let's see it now.
And the cool part about that is everything you're describing is exactly how the Ravens operate. and I'm pleading the Seahawks. They were talking about how they joke they always want the same players in the draft. Almost every draft the Ravens have done, I'm like, yeah, that's smart. That's smart. That's smart. And that has not been the case with John Schneider's drafts. The last two, maybe a little more, but there was a lot of years where I was just pleading with the team, just draft like the Ravens. Take good players, figure it out later, and don't hyper focus on positions. But free agency, back to free agency, everything you just talked about is exactly how the Ravens have operated for almost 2 decades. And if you look at how many veterans have just gone to that team, it's usually been the low-cost guy that kind of fell out of favor of someone else, like Jadeveon Clowney this year, Kyle Van Noy. They get these name recognition guys that kind of jump to their team, and they don't pay a lot of money for them. They don't make big splashes all the time, and they're just able to make them Ravens. And like they've been doing that for so long. And the Seahawks kind of went with these like 5-star former first-round picks that they think they can like figure out how to maximize. Like Pete Carroll and them loved that 2013 draft that was terrible, but they did not approach free agency like Baltimore. They tried to get these highly athletic players that haven't worked out, like big names, first-round picks, and very few of them have actually worked out. Almost none of them. So I'm pleading the Seahawks to do exactly what you're talking about, because they need to get some man strength on the line of scrimmage. They can't just go all rookies. You need some physical power. And like there's the Detroit free agents coming out. I don't get the sense they're going to re-sign Evan Brown. I don't get the sense they're going to – I don't think they should re-sign Damian Lewis. I think maybe a Kevin Zeitler would make more sense at half the price. But exactly what you talked about on defense. Some of the Ravens don't have like a highly paid defensive lineman. Justin Matabuke is about to become that, but it's guys like Michael Pierce, who was undervalued. They got him for cheap. He provided incredible value. They found guys over the years, and Seattle's been okay with that. That's what they used to be like. They'd find Al Woods. They found Jaron Reed last year. That's the kind of guy the Ravens would sign, and it's always line of scrimmage players. They made that big splash of linebacker that really a lot of fans would have gone crazy about, but it really worked. But exactly what you talked about is how the Ravens have approached free agency for almost years. They haven't spent on wide receiver until this year. They haven't really spend on tight end. They don't spend on running back. They find these guys in the draft and they spend on line of scrimmage and just replenishing guys that have had success elsewhere. Like Patrick, the Devin White is exactly the kind of guy the Ravens would sign, and it would somehow work. I'm hoping Mike McDonald has that impact. It's not just John's going to handle this, I'll handle the coaching. Those free agency meetings, I think, are going to look a lot different.
I wanted to ask you about the center position. Because I was having a look today, and I can sense that there's a growing sentiment from Seahawks fans for like Jackson Powers Johnson, Oregon. And I have to say, I went back and watched him again, and I kind of got swayed a little bit by the Senior Bowl hype. But then I went back and watched it and remembered that he didn't fire his hands quickly enough for me. And it is a bit of an issue. That is, I know there are sort of some personnel people who that's the first thing they look for. It's the one thing he doesn't do very, very well. And then I had a look at his size, Jeff, and he's 334 pounds. And I kind of had a quick study on sort of what Seattle. So I've considered with this Seattle, Baltimore, and Washington, because I think they're the 3 teams you have to think about here with Grubb and Huff, Matt McDonald, and the Seahawks. So think of the centers that the teams have had over the period. So the Seahawks had, so Washington had Parker Brailsford last year, who was very highly rated. He's just transferred to Alabama. And he is 6'2" and 280 pounds. The year before, they had Corey Luciano, who was 6'3" and 307 pounds. The Seahawks had Evan Brown, 6'2", 302 pounds, and Austin Blythe, 6'2", 298 pounds. And in Baltimore, they drafted Tyler Linderbaum in the first round, who's 6'2" and 296 pounds. So they are all the same. They all ran a great short shuttle. Well, Parker Brailsford, I don't know, because he's not done a combine yet. But they all fit the same profile, Jeff. And when Powers Johnson is 334 pounds, it doesn't fit that style. And Graham Barton doesn't either. Like, he's the tackle at Duke, who I love, but he's going to have to, I think he's the best center prospect, but he's 6'5" and 315 pounds. And it just makes me wonder. I think that's just something to consider for the Seahawks. Are they looking for that smaller leverage winner, very agile center, rather than the big hulking, we're going to draft this guy in the top 25 center prospect? I don't know. What I would say is that there are centers in the draft who do fit that profile. Charles Turner at LSU, Zach Frazier at West Virginia, and Dylan McMahon, who I think might be the guy to keep an eye on. And I have all three of those in round 3. It might not be where, in an ideal world, Jeff, Tyler Linderbaum would be there. They could trade down to 25 or something and just take him there. And we could just say, job done. But I'm not sure that's the way it's going to be. But I do think they could trade down into the 20s or 30s and get really good offensive lineman or defensive lineman or whatever in that kind of range there, Jeff. I'm just not sure they're going to go in the direction maybe that sort of some people think at that center position. Have you got any thoughts on that? Because there is a bit of a trend there with size, isn't there?
Yeah, and the guy I'm wondering about is Oluwatimi. He fits the size you're exactly talking about, and they're going to have some pretty good firsthand knowledge of him. He was an award winner in Michigan with Harbaugh was there. I think Harbaugh was coaching either running backs, or they're going to know him pretty well. And I don't know if they're going to value the high-profile center, but I know John was very interested in Tyler Linderbaum that year. They explored trading up for him. But Baltimore has had a lot of more investments at guard historically. And looking at Washington, I know just based on John's patterns, they don't seem to value having that dominant center. Like, not taking Creed Humphrey is pretty telling. But yeah, I think they might be still looking at the lower. I think guard is going to be a much bigger priority in this system. And I think based on talking to some of the people who know Washington, some of the guys on my show are big Washington fans. They talked about it. The offensive line is on the move a lot. It's more about being an athlete. And so I don't think you're going to have a big hulking center like the Oregon guy. I think he'd be a great player, but I don't know if they're going to value that. I think if you look at some of the guards that they've had in Baltimore, I think those might be better fits. And before Linderbaum, I don't know if they've had more veteran centers. They haven't had the high-priced center. I think I feel like I've been hoping the Seahawks have drafted a center in the first 3 rounds for 7 years. I just don't know if it's going to happen here. I think there's a lot of other areas they have to address. I don't think it's going to line up. So that's why I wonder about Oluwatimi. I think he could be the guy. I think they're going to have great background him on that staff. And he was an Outland Award winner at Michigan with Harbaugh. I think McDonald just missed him. He left before Oluwatimi transferred over. So I wonder about him.
I'm hope I think go with him, and that he was an integral part of that final Michigan season. He was there, and I really hope that they like Zach Zinter as a consequence of all this Michigan connection, because I think he's just so good. For me, Jeff, he's the kind of guy like Steve Hutchinson's in that front office as well. He must know a bit about the Michigan guys, so you kind of just hope that they will go with that. Jeff, I promised I would let you go because it is, of course, Valentine's Day. So what I'm going to do is I'll do the super chats on my own. And we've done an hour, so I will let you escape at this point and enjoy some quality time with your significant other. So really appreciate it, Jeff. Always great to catch up, and everybody loves hearing what you've got to say. So thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. She's just about to get home, so good timing on your
perfect timing. Right, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Speak soon. So that's Jeff. I want to get through the super chats though, because a few of them sent them in, and if you want to send them in, if you want to send another one in before I wrap up, then happy to do that as well. So Jeffrey says, exciting times to be a Seahawks fan. No idea what to expect for the first time in a decade. Fail or succeed, just glad it'll be different. I'm hearing you there, Jeffrey. I'm completely agree on that. Thank you for your super chat. This from Zone76. Rob and Jeff, 300 million Swifties. Couldn't be wrong. Meanwhile, here's to Jed's 3rd participation trophy. Yeah. on the one hand, I really wanted to just sort of bathe in the tears of the Niners fans. And then on the other hand, I can't help but think, God, just imagine being in their shoes. I found the Baltimore Super Bowl they lost really funny. And especially like the Harbaugh doing the whole hold thing. Can you remember that? And the pen round his neck. I found that hilarious, especially because we won the Super Bowl the year after that, I think it was. Was that 2012? Yeah. And then when they lost against the Chiefs, because it was just such an epic collapse last night, 3 years ago, that was hilarious. And this one, I kind of felt like, it's actually starting to get a bit sad watching it happen all the time. But who cares? I might play if I get one super chat before we wrap up here, calling for the little video we played at the start to be played again, I will play it to finish this stream. So we'll see if we get a super chat for that. Dan says the Niners won the NFC title in spite of giving up a haul to get Trey Lance a couple of years ago. We've got a lot of ground to make up to catch them. Completely agree, Dan. I mean, it makes you wonder if they hadn't messed up the quarterback situation so much. I know they've obviously done a good job with Brock Purdy and he fits Shanahan's system, but imagine if they took Patrick Mahomes in the first year that Shanahan was there. They admit they didn't even scout the guy. They were so intent on signing Kirk Cousins, who they didn't even go for, Jimmy Garoppolo instead. Imagine if they'd actually just scouted Mahomes and had the foresight to go with him. Like, where would they be now? They'd never be beaten. I mean, it's crazy. So thank goodness for that. And the problem they've got is Purdy. This is something I said after the Super Bowl. They're going to have to pay Purdy in a year. And some of their guys, like the Kittles and the Debos, have had injuries. They're not quite as effective as they were. Still very good players, but they're getting older. Trent Williams isn't getting any younger. Fred Warner's not getting any. These players they're in the peak now. But, a few years down the line, are they still going to be there? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. Chase says, Roman Jeff, thank you for doing these. I've seen some opinions floating around that we should try to trade Metcalf. Thoughts? Well, my thought on that, Chase, was that when I saw I think it was Curtis who retweeted it, and my initial reaction was like head in hands to think that, of all the topics to discuss this week, trading DK Metcalf should be way down on the list. But then I actually listened to Mike Solk's argument, and I feel a little bit differently. I just think it's been couched badly. Like, what I think his general point is that he wants to see the Seahawks built through the trenches. And the best way to do that would be to accumulate more stock to focus on that. And then if that had been the premise, and then it was a case of how do you get more stock? Well, one option would be to trade DK Metcalf. And what could you get? This is how much it would cost you in terms of dead money. If you'd have brought that to the table, if you'd done like a pros and cons of that and maybe looked at other ways to get stock or to create cap room, then I don't think it would have created the outrage that it has online. But because it was kind of framed as should the Seahawks trade DK Metcalf, I don't think people really listened to the argument. They just sort of thought this is somebody who wants to get rid of DK Metcalf. But I think the argument actually was how do you build through the trenches? You need more stock. How can you do it? You've only really got one asset. It's DK Metcalf. I don't think it's very likely to happen because for two reasons. One, you would have to eat an obscene amount of dead money to trade him, which would absolutely hammer your cap space this year. Two, replacing Geno, like Geno Smith, DK Metcalf will be really difficult to justify because unlike with like Russell Wilson, you wouldn't get like 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 3 players with DK Metcalf. The chances are you get a first and maybe a second. It'd be like a Frank Clark style trade. And they turned the Frank Clark trade into like LJ Collier, didn't they? So, what you might end up doing is just end up with a really mediocre player while DK Metcalf's off, I don't know, playing for the Chiefs and winning Super Bowls. So, I don't think which is what Frank Clark did. I don't think you can risk that. And the other thing is, I think John Schneider. Look, Hugh Millen keeps saying this on KJR. He keeps saying John Schneider wants to really get the most out of DK Metcalf. Nudge, wink, nudge, wink. And basically, what he's saying is that John Schneider said that to him. So I think that Schneider is all in on DK Metcalf and has absolutely zero intention of trading him and probably thinks that DK Metcalf's got the potential to be one of the best players in the NFL and actually intends to put a system in place to get the most out of him, not trade him away. So I think there's almost no chance it'll happen. But That's my thoughts on that. Matt B says, regarding your reservations about the different QBs in the draft, how many of your concerns do you think could be mitigated by coaching? Well, it's an interesting question. I think all of them could be. I think good coaching is the be-all and end-all to a certain extent, because like Brock Purdy was the last player in the draft, and I think if Brock Purdy was playing for probably 31 other football teams, he wouldn't be, he may be in a practice squad right now. But because Kyle Shanahan's system is as good as it is, Brock Purdy helps take a team to a Super Bowl, and there you go. So I think coaching can mitigate a lot of those. What I would say is, it's not that I have necessarily reservations about the quarterback class. I think I just don't really know what to think of them, because you could easily make a case for Bo Nix's arm and his athleticism and his upside and his potential, but there are sort of other things that, like the scheme that he played in was very easy. He was never touched. You know, the Pac-12, such as it is, wasn't much of a challenge. He couldn't beat Washington. He lost them 3 times. You know, there's all that sort of stuff with Michael Penix. You know, wow, what an arm, unbelievable. This arm's as good as Mahomes and Allen. Crazy, crazy good. Look at some of these ridiculous throws. But then, yeah, it doesn't really scramble around that much. Isn't going to extend plays. Injury history. Short intermediate accuracy is not great. Can he sort of play that patient, methodical thing, or is he just an explosive play artist? You know, that's with him. He's left-handed. It is a bigger issue than some people make out. Rattler is small. He is very, very small. There are some character concerns from his time at Oklahoma that teams are going to ask about. At the same time, very good on the run. He is like a poor man's Mahomes. You know, can scramble around, can make plays with his legs, can be methodical. Has played in a situation in the SEC behind a terrible O-line where he's got hammered. You know, and has delivered and has played well. So there are lots of very positive things about him. You know, I probably have more reservations about Drake May than I do about the 3 guys I've just talked about. So, like, look, there are pros, there are cons, and unlike with the 2020 quarterback class, where I just went, nah, pass on the whole lot, not interested, all round 3 at best, wouldn't draft them anyway, even though I've got them in round 3, probably still wouldn't take them there anyway. And last year I could go, yeah, you know, Anthony Richardson looks the way he does, Will Levis looks the way that he does, love Stroud, he was my QB1, Bryce Young was my QB4, but still, there's, you know, it's about the size considerations. There's, you know, there is talent there, natural talent, kind of like a Steph Curry quality to him. I wouldn't have took him first overall, but I wouldn't have took him second overall. But, you know, there was some talent there. And then with this year's class, I just think Caleb Williams is a no-brainer number 1 overall pick. Jaden Daniels probably should go number 2. And then anything, like, you could, if you told me you didn't want to take Drake May, I'd say fine. If you told me you wanted to take him at number 3 overall, I'd probably say fine. If you said Michael Penix is a round 3 pick, I'd say okay. And if you said you're going to take him in the top 25, I'd say okay. You know, I think it's really hard to get an angle on what this QB class is. But good coaching always helps. And the Seahawks just appointed Michael Penix as old defensive coordinator. Mike McDonald used to coach defense for the team that had JJ McCarthy. Jay Harbaugh, the special teams coach, was with McCarthy for the last couple of years. They've got a lot of intel, as we were saying. David says, thanks for your work, Seahawks Draft Blog, raising a glass of Chardonnay to the Niners' pain. Just a shame it keeps the Taylor Swift bandwagon rolling. To be honest, I honestly, it hasn't annoyed me at all, the Taylor Swift stuff. I don't know. It probably did initially. Like, it was like, oh, not again. But by the end, I find it quite charming. I find it quite... I had no issue with it, you know. It didn't bother me at all. Jeffrey says, the Lock disrespect is weird. We've barely seen him play, and he's never been given a reasonable chance here. No one knows how good or bad he is, in my opinion. I think you can make that case, Jeffrey. I don't think you need to see a full season of him in Seattle to kind of think, I'm not convinced. And I thought he played quite poorly in the Eagles game until the final drive. I'm not sold on him. I think he's got a great arm and he's very athletic and he's got great size. I think he's got tremendous talent. I'm just not sure that he can bring it together to be a NFL quarterback. And there's lots of players like that. I just don't feel that excited about either Geno Smith or Drew Lock. You know, for me, my hope is that the Seahawks are going to draft somebody and, I think back to when they drafted Russell Wilson and the excitement that generated. And I think people have forgotten, because a lot of people now, because Russ went away, they've kind of said, it was the LOB and Marshawn. But Russ was freaking awesome. And there was a period where he just looked amazing. Like, not a Mahomes amazing, but good enough to make you believe that you could win a Super Bowl every year. And I want to get back to that. 25-year-old fantastic quarterback who you sort of look forward to watch every week. Who you think, do you know what? We've got a 10-year run at this. That's what I want. And I don't think Drew Lock or Geno Smith are going to be those guys. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say what I've just said. I don't think that makes me a Geno Smith hater. I think Drew Lock or Geno Smith can be a bridge, but I don't really, neither kind of make me go, oh yeah, can't wait to watch them. Matt B says, I keep seeing the Seahawks popping up in these Justin Fields trade rumors. Any flames flickering underneath this smoke? I don't know. The answer is no. They're talking about first or second round pick for Justin Fields, which just isn't very good. I think I thought I didn't like Justin Fields going into the draft. I thought, he was another one who was overhyped. I had no interest in drafting him that year. If they'd have traded Russell Wilson that year, I wouldn't have wanted to take them. The talk was he could get to the Bears, was the team they were talking to in North Dakota that year, and the deal was presented to Pete Carroll, and he said no, and I wouldn't have wanted them to do the trade that the Bears did to get Justin Fields. I have no interest in him. I don't think he's a good enough passer of a football. I think he's a great athlete. I don't want to acquire him and then have to pay him a massive salary. No. The Bears would not be the Bears if he should have performed better than he has over the last couple of years. So I don't. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I want to go in a different direction. I want to aim higher than that. And I don't think they will. And the last super chat from Joe PD10 says, just a bit of support for your great work, Rob. Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Appreciate that. The only thing, the sort of final thing I would say is, like, I've noticed in the comments, and I see this online all the time, it's this kind of the language that people use. Like, I can see something that Locke is utter trash. This is insane was something I saw earlier. That, why, like, my word, can we just tone it down across the board with this fan base? Like, it's okay to say, I'd like a more exciting future quarterback than Geno Smith, or, do you know what? I maybe would appreciate more, Drew Lock to get a chance because he's cheaper or something like that. We don't have to call people insane or crazy or, a hater or anything like this for just wondering and having different opinions on how this team could form. Okay, so we're going there. Unless there's no other super chats, I'm going to wrap things up. I did not get a super chat calling for this, but I'm feeling generous. We started the stream with this. Let's watch it. So there we go. Thank you to Jeff for joining us for the live stream. Thank you to all for great watching again, watching numbers again for the stream. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these. I think we're going to do another stream on Sunday, so stay tuned for that. That'll be with Robbie and Adam. So join us for that. You don't want to miss a video, so subscribe. Make sure you like this video, please. Far fewer of you like the video than actually watch, but it does help. And if you could leave a comment in the comment section, even if it's just to say Go Hawks, that certainly helps as well. Don't forget to check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Loads of articles on there, loads of information, and we're going to be across it every step of the way up until the NFL draft coming up in April. So thanks for everybody for watching. Thank you for the super chats. Until next time, bye for now.